Let me check. Yeah. So, there's no perfect church. I was just on a phone call with a guy, and he said that to me. This is absolutely, absolutely true. Jesus said, be perfect. He didn't say, do perfect. But I said to him, I said, but is that an excuse? I mean, if I was being a bad father, and my son came to me and said, Dad, it's not good what you're doing, and I said, well, there's no perfect dad. I'm using that as an excuse. Being perfect isn't the same as doing perfect. Being perfect is willing to hear that you did wrong, willing to fix what you did wrong. So I said to the guy, he's against the Orthodox Church. He thinks it's really, really bad. For you guys in the West, that would be equivalent, almost equivalent to the Catholic Church. So I said to him, should I go to the Orthodox Church? He said, no. I go, but you just said there's no perfect church. They're not perfect either. I mean, if you're going to make an excuse for this church, then it should apply to that church. And if it doesn't apply, then clearly you have hypocrisy. Most of the time, the excuse that there's no perfect church is used to excuse manipulation and abuse. When a church won't deal with things, it's sick. You know, I've talked before about the biggest scandals in the Catholic Church is sex abuse. And that comes from not dealing with gossip and slander. Now let me qualify that. When a child is abused and he goes to a more senior priest, that priest immediately dismisses it as slander. So when you have the attitude when somebody has been rude to you or talked about you behind your back that supposedly it's spiritual to let it go, you're creating a culture of never dealing with problems. So when there's a big problem, it's easier for you to call it slander, or you might even think it is slander. The proper way to deal with slander is to investigate it. Especially a child. If a child comes and says, that guy touched me, you need to go to that, you need to investigate. And that's how the child's going to learn to not slander if he is slandering. So, you know, my mom tells me that her friend keeps telling her that you need to die to self and let it go. But that's not what Jesus said. Jesus said if someone does you wrong, go tell them. He didn't say die to self and let it go. Sure, we're to die to self. I mean, that's what the devil does, right? He wraps truth and then adds a non-truth. Sure, we're to die to self, but he never said let it go. He said go tell your brother. And if your brother won't hear you, bring one or two more. And again, you know, if you've watched my videos, the problem with bringing one or two more, the same problem I had in the beginning is we're afraid of what people think. We don't want trouble. We want people to like us. We don't want to be called a troublemaker. We don't want to end up alone. So we don't deal with conflict. So any church is going to have sin, but if they're not dealing with sin, then they're beyond not being a perfect church. They're being a synagogue of Satan. You know, he called me because he saw one of my videos from 5 years ago about a guy in town who, in my opinion, blasphemed God. You know, there was a prophecy given in the church that my children, you're confused. You think that my blessing means my approval, which is the same thing God had spoken to me. And then I was talking to him about it. I said, why don't you guys ask God what he doesn't agree with? And he immediately answered, you'll hear the devil. I said, excuse me, if we ask for the Holy Spirit, the Father will give us the devil? Now, why did he say that? I don't know. Maybe because Chris was a friend of his and he went around telling people that I hear the devil, or maybe he thinks his church is perfect, so he didn't want to hear that God thought something was wrong. He's closed-minded. That's the problem with worshiping Jesus as a creed, is you don't even realize you're an old wineskin. Maybe it was a combination of Chris having slandered me and him thinking his church was the best church. So saying there's no perfect church, that's an excuse for abuse. And then they're stuck in the trap that they think that they have to go to church. The passage in Hebrews is, forsake not the assembling, exhorting one another daily. Okay, first of all, it doesn't say don't forsake church. It says forsake not fellowship, getting together with somebody, if there is somebody. You know, let's look at Paul. He was in Jerusalem, having fled Damascus, and the Lord appears to him in a vision and tells him to go to Tarsus. He's in Tarsus 10 years before Barnabas comes and takes him to Antioch. There was no church in Tarsus. There were no other believers in Tarsus. He had no converts in Tarsus. He was in Tarsus alone for 10 years. When God calls somebody to a great work, there is a great training. Moses was 80 years old when he was called. Stop looking at the outward appearance. Stop looking at the flesh. Look at the spirit, the heart. Stop using there's no perfect church as an excuse. I remember some 5, 6, 7 years ago, some guy was telling me, his brother-in-law was telling him, no matter how bad your church is, you never leave. And I said to him, well, tell your brother-in-law to go back to the Orthodox church because they were there first and somebody left them and started his church, if you really believe that. Clearly, how do you know when you're not being logical? When we produce hypocrisy. Jesus said, when you see hypocrisy, to flee it. In a way, hypocrisy can be a blessing because it can show us we're making excuses, but that's being perfect, being open to hearing that you have had hypocrisy. If somebody calls somebody an idiot, you should tell him it's not right. And if he doesn't apologize, you got to go get 2 witnesses. And you think, oh my gosh, that's a lot of work. Yeah, it's called the family of God. The church is called the mother of God's children. If my son called his brother an idiot, it's a lot of work raising children. Don't say it's a lot of work as if it's petty because you're lazy. It's petty to teach my son he shouldn't call somebody an idiot. It's petty for his brother to want to help him to learn he shouldn't call people idiot. And even if his brother's doing it because he takes it personally, eventually he'll learn to not take it personally and learn that the reason for getting help is to help his brother to have good character. It's the same reason why we discipline our children. You know, we read in Proverbs that if you don't discipline your children, train them, child rearing, that you hate your children. So in the same respect, you're hating God's sheep. You're hating your brethren if you don't help him to learn to not call someone an idiot. For every idle word a man will be judged. Jesus said, calling someone an idiot is to revile. To revile is to blaspheme. If he calls me an idiot, in 1 Peter 4:14, on my part God's glorified, on his part God's blasphemed. It's in the scriptures. Sopranos. Yes, there will never be a perfect church. Doing perfect. But being perfect we can do. Sorry, I hit the thing and it shook the camera. It's pointless if you speak in tongues or have prophecy, but you have not fairness. Matthew 7:23, he'll say to you, despite the fact that you speak in tongues, maybe you healed somebody, you were unfair. When Brian asked someone to go talk to his brother because he thinks he blasphemed, you weren't willing to go. Jesus will say, I never knew you. Judas healed the sick. He was part of the 12 sent out and then the 70 sent out. Judas cast out demons. Okay, maybe I'm wrong and this guy Samuel didn't blaspheme. So by bringing in 2 people, I will learn and realize. Doing this causes everybody to mature. The problem is that you fear men. When Moses came, the people rejoiced. When Moses went to Pharaoh and Pharaoh got worse, the people complained that God sent Moses. If you're complaining over difficulty, you're no different than the children of Israel. You only want God for good, for paradise, for pleasure, for supply. You're not willing to deal with God's problems and to go to battle for God through not physical warfare, not physical violence, but to go through hardships and difficulties and sufferings. You're not willing to bear the reproach of Christ outside the camp with him. Moses was outside the camp. After the Israelites sinned, he never camped with them again. That's like never going to church. An ecclesia is a government, a place where problems are dealt with. A family is a place where things are dealt with. When a man doesn't want problems, but he wants companionship, he goes to an escort. So if you're going to church and you're never dealing with problems, you're going to an escort. As God called Israel a prostitute, your church is a prostitute.